Hi there, this is Coloring Chemist. My name is Connie, and welcome back to my channel. This is going to be the promised video where I do some on-camera coloring with my Pitt Pens. I hesitate to call this a tutorial because I don't think it is. I guess we could call it a color along, but here's why I've tended to put off these types of videos. And I know I'm long-winded. I apologize for that. It just is what it is. Probably if you want quick, short, to the point videos, you may want to check out some of the other wonderful colorists out there on YouTube. I don't feel like I have knowledge or talent to share. As a math science person, for those of you that don't know, my day job is as a chemistry instructor. Sort of exploring my artistic side has been very recent for me. And so it's not like I have any training in, coloring or art or anything like that. So I feel like, like a tutorial, I don't know what I'm doing. So how could I teach other people? And the second reason why I tend to avoid these kinds of videos, and I feel very nervous right now, I don't know if you can tell, I don't have the ability to visualize pages in my head. And so I feel like in order to do a successful, whether it be a color along or tutorial or something like that, it's helpful if you can visualize the final product in your head so that you sort of know where you're going with it, and then you can, sort of provide a step-by-step, this is what we're going to do. My brain, for whatever reason, doesn't work that way. I can't visualize. And so really, most of my coloring pages, I just sort of start and it goes where it goes. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So that's kind of the other thing. If this doesn't work, then that'll be a whole lot of filming for nothing. Although, you know what, if it doesn't work, I might put it out there anyway. We'll see. Hopefully you're seeing this. I have no idea if this is going to be one big long video or if I'm going to put it out in parts. I have no idea how long this is going to take me. I'm hoping not to speed up any footage. So this is just going to be me coloring and nattering at you. There's probably going to be periods of silence where I'm just coloring. So I don't know, hopefully you can sit down and if you want to color along with me, you can color the same picture, and I'll talk about in a second where this is from. But if you just want to sit and color something else, listen to me, I don't know, do my best to try and explain what I'm doing, and you'll see me make decisions on the fly about, where different colors are going to go. That's basically what's going to happen. So, the book first. This is Fairy Tales and Folklore. This is a lovely book by Emily Liedehall-Oberg. And the reason I chose this book, and I think I mentioned it in my completed pages for May video, because at the very beginning I mentioned that this was a whip to be. People have been asking me for, color alongs or tutorials using Pitt pens and Staedtler pens. And when you're using these to color, paper is everything. Everything. It's not even... Paper is far more important than the image, than anything else. Because the way I color with these, and I know there's tons of different ways you can color with them, but the way I color with them and the way we're going to be coloring with them today, or on this picture, I'm going to blend on the page. So I'm not putting them on a palette, picking them up. I'm not using them to base, although, I guess I'm using them to base, and that the image will be colored completely with these pens. I'm going to blend on the page because that's how I like to color with them. And there are certain papers that allow you to do that and certain papers that just will not. Lots of other books like Joanna Basford or even Kirby Roseanne, depending on where the book is printed, you're going to get different papers. So with Joanna Basford, although I think she's changed that, but in the past, certainly, you would have the US edition of her books, you would have the UK, you would have the French edition, you would have maybe a German edition or a Dutch edition, you might have a Swedish edition, you might have a Japanese edition. Every single one of those books would have different paper. And so if I was going to do a color along on, say, and the edition I prefer most for Joanna's books to work with Pitt Pens is the UK edition. So if I'm doing a color along on the UK edition and you happen to have a US edition, you're like, oh great, you know, I could do this color along with Connie. It's not going to work. It's not, that paper is not going to respond to these pens the same. So I wanted to choose a book that I knew, or at least I think, is the same everywhere. I don't think there's different country editions to this. Could be wrong. But as far as I know, this is the edition, because I think hopefully I'm not wrong, even in like the UK, this is still OR coloring. I don't think it's OUR coloring. I'm hoping that's true. So everyone should have the same paper. We should all be working on the same paper. And this paper loves Pitt Pens. I haven't done anything to this image because that's another thing, you know, and I'll talk about that maybe in the next video I'm going to do. You can pre-treat pages with workable fixative, you know, with satin glazing liquid, and that can help Pitt Pens to work better too. But this is just untreated. Excuse me. I just opened this book. This was the image I chose, and we're going to color. Talk about the colors that I'm choosing here. So I went with, like my Boston Pizza container, I went with a color palette that I actually borrowed from the very, very lovely Karen, Zucchini Kitty. And I will link her channel below. I'm sure all of you guys know about her. She's been around for a while in the coloring community. I love her color palettes. They are beautiful and soft and muted. And this was a color palette that she did, I'm trying to remember, I think it was a couple of years ago. And I've fallen in love with it. And I've done a number of pages using this color palette. So what we've got is, let's talk about greens first. I was going to use exclusively Pitt Pens, and we'll see, we'll try. Because I know some of you have Pitt Pens, some of you don't, some of you have Staedtler pens, but I didn't want to do a color along where we were just relying, or where we were relying on, you know, colors from both sets, because I thought, well, that's going to be kind of, you know, I have the 60 set of Pitt Pens and the 60 set of Staedtler pens, but not everybody does have that. So we are going to use Faber-Castell Earth Green 172, and I'll put all these colors down below in the description box as well, and Chromium Green Opaque 174. And I thought the great part about using Pitt Pens too, these color names and numbers are the same as Albrecht Durer, the same as Polychromos. So if you wanted to do this color along but you didn't have Pitt Pens, you could totally do this with your Polychromos pencils or with your Albrecht Durer pencils. That's kind of cool. So Earth Green 172, Chromium Green Opaque 174. I've got these two colors here. This is Cinnamon 189, and this is Beige Red 132. If you have an older set of Pitt Pens or Polychromos or, you know, Albrecht Durer, what did this used to be called? It was like medium flesh, maybe, or something along that line, but the number would be the same. So you're looking for number 132. Yeah, here it's called Beige Red, but it could be called something else, but it still would be 132. So Cinnamon 189, Beige Red 132. We've got Light Cobalt Turquoise 154 and Cobalt Turquoise 153. So Light Cobalt Turquoise 154, Cobalt Turquoise 153. We have, and I'm sort of grouping these together, kind of how I'm going to be using them. These three I'm going to group together. This ivory is going to come into play in a bunch of different places, but this is a combination I use for kind of an antique gold kind of look. So we've got ivory 103, raw umber 180, and dark sepia 175. So ivory Raw Umber, Dark Sepia. We've got Nougat, 178, and Walnut Brown, 177. My handy dandy white 101 Pitt brush pen. Always need that for lightening areas up, etc. And 104 light yellow glaze. I'm going to show you how I tend to use this particular color. I actually use it, I think, as a glaze. So I put it over top of other things to brighten them up. So 104 light yellow glaze, sorry. I'm also going to be using a Tombow blender. So this is a water-based, Tombow is a water-based kind of marker. You've got all kinds of other brands that are, Ohuhu makes a water-based marker. Lyra makes a water-based marker. I'm trying to think. Basically, you should be able to use the colorless blenders from those sets if you have them. I'm saying you should be able to. I'm assuming that the formulation in a water, and it has to be water-based. You can't use your alcohol colorless blender. It's got to be water-based. I'm assuming the formula of them should all be about the same, but I can't guarantee. So if you have a Tombow blender, that's what I'm going to be using. If you don't have a Tombow blender, you can try using a water brush with a little bit of water, but I don't think you're going to get the same effect, and this is more difficult to use, but that's an option. Now, I did pull my Staedtler Pigment Pen, Pastel Green. This is 507, Pastel Green. I would like to use this, but again, I don't... If you see me using this anywhere, it's because I want an area... The two greens that I chose from the Pitt Pens, they're earthy greens. And there really isn't in the Pitt Pen range a light green that's going to complement these. The lightest green they have, I think it's called light green, but it's very yellow green. It's very bright. And I wanted an earthier green for these leaves. So that's where this comes in. So we might use this, or I might just pull it out with the Tombow blender, these two. We'll see. If you don't have the Staedtler pens, this would work just as well. Well, you know what? Maybe we'll do some leaves in both, and we'll see which works better. I've got some paper off to the side here. It's just some scratch paper. When you're blending on the page, particularly your lightest color, if I'm doing a little section of leaf and I blend it all out, I then take, and you'll see me scribble off, or you might not because it might be off to the side and I might zoom in, before I go to do the sort of blending of the next section, because otherwise the tip of your lightest color tends to get a lot of the darker color on it, and then slowly it's not light anymore. So always have some scribble scratch paper off to the side. I put a sheet in behind. I shouldn't need to. These should not go through this paper. I've never had that happen before. I guess if they do, they'll ruin this image, but I just have never had that happen. It's just, I almost force a habit. I guess it helps to, although I shouldn't be pushing very hard on these pens, but I don't know. I just always have a piece of paper in behind. So, once again, I have no plan in my head. You know what I usually start with on a page? Leaves. Because in my head, leaves are green. So, let's zoom in. And we'll get you in relatively close so you can see what I'm doing. And we're just going to start in on the leaves. So, ooh, that's close. So what I do when I color with Pitt pens or Staedtler pens and I'm blending on the page is I will take the caps off of either both, or if I have 3 pens that I'm blending with, or the water-based blender like the Tombow blender, I take the caps off everything because you need to move relatively quickly between colors. Because otherwise, you don't want to let the ink dry on the page, because then you won't be able to pull ink and get that smooth blend. You can post these on the back end, but I find they just kind of flop around and get in the way. So I just take them off and put them to the side. I hold them in my left hand because I'm right-handed, and then I just pull them right from my left hand and use them as I need. So let's try using the Tombow blender to pull out some colors. And if that just isn't giving me the effect I want, I may bring in the Staedtler Pastel Green. You'll also see me turning the page just to get the best angle. So I apologize if that bothers anyone, and I'll try and keep it in frame here. I'm rambling because I'm scared. I don't know if this is going to work. I hope it works. I'm thinking, let's just do the simplest kind of leaf that I normally do, which is, it's almost like the leaf is dipping down into the center. So near to the main kind of center vein of the leaf here, it's going to be darker, and it's going to be lighter out to the edges. Simple enough. So I take my darkest of my greens, which is the, Chromium Green Opaque 174. And I'm just going to put a little bit of color, and you'll notice I don't scribble. It's like I'm flicking. Then I'll put it back in my left hand, grab my Earth Green 172, kind of not go right back to the where I had the start of the darker green, but I do go over that area. You'll see it a little bit better, and I can even come in a little more. You'll see that a little bit better when I do the next section, which is a bit of a bigger leaf. And then, I shouldn't be talking, I should be coloring. I'm going to use the Tombow blender to try and, well, not bad. And then I'm scribbling it off to the side. So you saw I used the Tombow blender to pull some of that ink forward to get a really light earthy green. So once again, kind of flick, 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 flick. And go back over it until I get the darkness I want. Then my lighter green, which is the earth green. Tombow blender, kind of grab and pull. And I just sort of, go over. Sometimes I'm pulling the color, towards the edge of the leaf. Sometimes if I feel that that's pulling too much color, I kind of draw the Tombow blender back the other way, right? I might, I'm mostly pulling the second green that I put down, but if I feel that that's not enough, I might put the tip of the Tombow blender back a little bit more where that original darker green was, maybe pull a little bit of that forward. Coloring with Pitt pens is really about practice. And I know a lot of you, hopefully the focus isn't going in and out. I hope it's not. A lot of you say that you struggle and there's a bit of frustration there. It's just practice. That's really what it is. You're not going to get the results you want after just one try with Pitt pens. I think part of this is too, this book is very hard to get to stay open. So again, that 174 Chromium Green Opaque right by the bottom of the section of the leaf there. Take the 172 Earth Green, kind of go back over it and draw it out a bit. And then the Tombow blender, kind of pull some of those greens forward. You can hear me scribbling off to the side there. I'm just going to pause here. There we go. Sorry about that. Had to pause and then I moved my book. I also noticed that because the page was bouncing a bit, focus was going in and out, so I got some bulldog clips to clip down the page. Hopefully that works. So just doing next section leaf. You might be thinking, why are we doing, oh no, the focus is still doing funny things. Okay, I'm gonna maybe, it's because I keep moving my hands, right? And I'm so closely focused. So I think what I will do is, you guys get the general idea now. I'll come back out a little bit so the camera won't keep. Still doing the weird focus thing. Sorry about that. Yeah, sorry, I forgot what I was talking about. So to do the leaf sections on the other side, oh, I was talking about, you know, could I do, like, why am I doing section by section? You know, could I not just do the whole leaf? You could, like I say though, your open time, your movement time with the pigments, or the ink I should say, I guess, in these pens is not that long. So if I were to put down the dark green on the whole leaf, and I don't know if I could be quick enough before it all dried. Do you know what I mean? So that's why and that's why these pens don't work super well. I know people have asked me, you know, how do I, is there a way to be able to use them on, you know, images that have larger areas? And it can be tough because you have to be able to, you know, if you want to blend on the page, you have to be quick. I mean, you can see how quickly, I mean, I realize I'm kind of doing it off camera here, but how quickly I'm changing from one pen to another. You know, if you wait too long, then the ink is going to dry and you're not going to be able to get it to move. So, and you can see I'm not super fussy about perfect blends. These pens are never going to give you the kind of seamless blend you're going to get with colored pencils. They're just not. So you have to be kind of okay with that. If you're not okay with that, these pens might not be, well, working with them this way might not be, you know, the way you want to go. I don't think I have too stark of a line in terms of, you know, blending, but again, it's not as seamless as it would be with pencils. So there's a leaf. Should I have brought out the dark a little bit more? Yeah, maybe, because this is diluting basically some of the ink and the color. So you know what, we'll go on to the next leaf and I'll try and keep that in my head. Coloring with these, again, it's all, you just kind of, you go by ear. Sorry, keep my hand in the way there. By ear. I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm trying to talk and color at the same time. I don't often do this. Play it by ear, I guess is what I was trying to say. You know, if this leaf up here doesn't look the way you wanted it to, then change it up a bit when you do the next leaf. Here, I'll go a bit further and leave less white space at the end. So then when I go to kind of pull that color forward, then I don't have, you know, here I had a lot of very light color. Here I'll have less. That's what leaves look like though, right? Leaves are not perfect. They're different. So the fact that this leaf doesn't look exactly like the other leaf, that's okay. I will say I don't often use the colorless blender, like a Tombow blender like this. And so I'm honestly kind of learning as I go here. But you can see how on this paper I'm able to to get that ink, you know, we've got a light space there, and I can pull that ink and get it to move, to fill up, you know, that white space that we were leaving at the end of each little leaf section here. If I was doing this on Amazon print paper, like the paper they used for CreateSpace coloring books, it's not going to do this, right? The ink will immediately soak into the paper, and there's no way I'll get it to move. In that case, you can spray it with workable fixative. You can put down a layer of satin glazing liquid, you know, something to put a coating on the paper so the ink doesn't sink in right away. This is how I color. If you have the Staedtler colorless blending solution, you could use that too. You could use it on a little paintbrush, or if you put it into, I have mine in, where's mine? I have mine in an empty aqua drop liner, and I just put the Staedtler pigment ink blender in here, or multi-ink blender I think it's called, and this Schminke aqua drop liner just comes empty, and it's meant to put their inks in, but I put that blending liquid in, and it has a tip that's similar to like the Staedtler pens and Pitt pens. I could have been using this in the same way I'm using the Tombow blender. I just figured more people probably had that Tombow blender. I know lots of you also have, so I'm just continuing and doing the same thing with each leaf section here. Lots of you probably have the Staedtler pens instead of the pigment pens. So, instead of the Pitt pens, sorry. So if you have the Staedtler pens instead of the Pitt pens and you want to be doing this, there's not really colors. Some colors do kind of overlap. And maybe what I'll do is, in the description box below, I will put in the Staedtler pen equivalents to these Pitt pen colors that I'm using. If you want to do this with, sorry, I'm forgetting to scribble off my lighter colors here. If you want to do this with the Staedtler pens instead of the Pitt pens, but there kind of isn't equivalent greens to these two Pitt greens in the Staedtler range. So, I mean, I can put a suggestion in the description box below for Staedtler colors instead. But you're probably going to get a yellowier green. But really, I mean, you can pick any two greens, one darker, one lighter, and a colorless water-based blender pen, and do this, right? And that's going to give you your leaves. But this is the basis, or the basics, of how I blend on paper. Just see me just switching pens all the time. And practice, you know, you'll get the hang of it after a while. So you can see, sometimes if I think that the tip of the leaf is too light, like I was saying before, I'll go back. Normally I'm taking that Tombow blender and just pulling out, and you can see there's not a lot of color difference between those two green markers I'm using. And I was just sort of taking, you know, from the lighter, but if I think that that's too light, I might go back. See how I bring the Tombow blender back to the slightly darker green, and maybe pull a bit of that forward. It's just practice and knowing, not even knowing. I mean, sometimes when I go to put these colors down, and particularly using this Tombow blender, which I don't normally use, I wasn't sure, you know, how it was going to work. But if I think that, you can see kind of there's, you know, maybe I pulled a little bit too much color forward, so that I'm pushing it back a little bit with that colorless blender. If there's too much color on the tip of my colorless blender and I think I'm pulling too much color forward, scribble it off and then go back in, and it almost kind of works like an eraser in a way. Sorry, I know that focus is really shifting. Hopefully it's not too distracting. Don't know how to fix that. It's because I keep lifting up my hands in front of the lens. So that if I had, because I'm always grabbing from one hand to another, if I had, maybe if I don't know if I keep that in frame, if that's going to help. Not really. Gives you a better idea of how I'm grabbing things out of my hand, though, I guess. And I could come out further. I just thought maybe you guys wouldn't be able to see what I'm doing. So yeah. Again, turn it so I can get that little flicking motion. Because it's easier to flick away from you than it is to flick towards you, right? You basically are never going to be using these pens, or at least I don't, with sort of that typical kind of scrubbing, you know, coloring like this with these pens. That's not how I color with them. It's always this flick, 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 flick. And then when I go to put this one down, I start a little bit into that darker color, flick, flick, flick forward, because then I'm pulling some of that darker color forward with this kind of medium color, and then take the colorless, flick, flick, flick forward, because I'm pulling the color forward now with the colorless blender. Like I say, instead of the colorless blender, I could have been using this lightest, this Staedtler Pastel green, and pulling everything forward. But again, I was just trying to stick with Pitt pen colors. Quite often I do like the more yellow greens. But like I say, this particular color combination, and Karen, Zucchini Kitty, wasn't using Pitt pens. She was using Polychromos. But this was basically her. I think she had a few different colors because of, you know, there's 120 Polychromos colors and only 60 Pitt pen colors, so I just kind of adapted the color palette a bit for just use with Pitt pens. But turn the thing all the way around. Bulldog clips got caught in my desk there. It doesn't really matter how we're, and when you have tiny little areas like, you know, that tiny little section that I'm doing in the leaf right there, I do the best you can. I mean, I'm sort of doing, there's not a lot of room there to pull pigment. I was doing about a third of each section with the darker color, but now it looks like I'm getting closer to almost half. Just because, you know, with this one I was finding I was pulling too much color, and then pulling too much of I didn't lay down enough pigment, so when I went to pull it forward, I was only left with a tiny little bit of pigment right there. And if that bothers you, I mean, you can always go back in with the same color Polychromos. Once it's dry, like that leaf's more or less dry, I could also go back in with these Pitt pens and put down a bit more color if I thought that, you know, I needed to fix that. But yeah, like I say, with these pens, you have to be okay with Not perfection. Because I don't think, I mean, I don't know. Probably if I was an artist and knew what I was doing, maybe I could get perfection. But I'm not. I just do what I do. Remember I said before there might be times when I don't talk. Again, I do apologize for the focus. It just keeps going in and out, but when I'm this close up, I mean, I guess I wouldn't have to be this close up now that you guys get the general idea. Let me come back a little bit more. So you can see I put those bulldog clips down. Oop, now I waited. This paper is more forgiving. There, now we're getting the focus issues, I think. This paper is a bit more forgiving in terms of, I think it's called open time when you're talking about paint anyway. Basically the time in which the paint is still wet and you can move it around. So I'm using that, maybe I'm using that phrasing correctly, I don't know. But this paper, I do not know what is on this paper, or it's the perfect paper for Pitt pen coloring. And you know, I've heard people say it's the perfect paper for all kinds of coloring. I swear, every coloring book artist should. Who's the publisher? I think it's Better Day Books. Now, publisher doesn't always matter. It's where they get it printed, right? And the paper they choose, and But if all coloring books could be on this paper, oh my goodness, my goodness, it would make me happy. Is this faster than colored pencil? For me, I find it is, but again, I've gotten, you can see I'm switching, you know, back and forth pretty quick here. So I've gotten quick at it. When you first start, you know, would you necessarily be this quick? Maybe not. I find it easier on my hand because I'm not pushing. You know, I mean, most markers you don't have to, but I'm really not pushing. I'm just touching the marker tip to the paper. That's really all you need. And so I do tend to have some hand issues, trigger finger, things like that. So I'm trying to figure out an angle here for me. And when I color with colored pencils, and I know I shouldn't, but I do tend to have a death grip on them. And I also tend to, no matter how much I try, I always seem to end up doing burnishing pressure. And so these are just lots easier on my hands. Can't even remember. You know, I rarely ever talk in color, so I feel like I think I've started some thoughts earlier and never finished them. Because I think I was talking about, what the heck was I talking about? Coloring bigger areas. I don't know if I ever finished that thought, but yeah, maybe I did. Because we were talking about, you know, why couldn't I just do the whole leaf all at the same time? You're gonna end up with, it's gonna be streakier looking. The blends may not be as good because by the time you get back to the first section and go to blend it out, you know, the dark you've laid down might already have dried. So I have used these pens in books with bigger spaces, and it just is gonna look, you're not gonna get a nice smooth blend. It's gonna look, not sure what the word is. You're gonna, wrong one. You're gonna see more streakiness. You're gonna see more of a delineation where one color meets another. You know, you're not gonna be able to blend it out, because unless you're coloring the larger object in sections, which is easier when you've got something like a leaf here that, you know, the artist has given you sections. So that's partially why I chose this book too. Emily's art just lends itself really well to this kind of coloring, because even if you've got, you know, a leaf, she's rarely ever drawn a leaf that doesn't have sections, right? So you wouldn't be coloring a whole leaf. You're going to be coloring little sections of leaves. Maybe someday I can do a color along where I do an image with bigger spaces. So I've just sort of been, like I say, adjusting. And you know what? I went outside the line there a little bit, so I scribbled this off to make sure there's no ink on it. And you can kind of use it like an eraser, you know, like if you're doing with alcohol markers and you go outside the line, you can take the colorless blender from the alcohol marker and just kind of lift up some of that ink. So if you're quick enough, because I went outside the line over here too, but I think, no, I can still take that ink off. So that's nice too. You can kind of almost use this as an eraser. But I was saying, I've just sort of been adjusting as I've been coloring. Looking at my leaves that I've done here, that right there I like the least. I think there was not enough pigment, and I pulled it out too much. I'm liking this better. Just sort of adjusting as I go. It's kind of how these pens, you kind of have to be okay with that and embrace it. Like I say, putting more color down, so when I go to pull it out, I don't, you know, I still leave some dark and then some medium in terms of the, you know, dark, medium, light as we go out to the edge of the leaf. Can I go back and fix that? Honestly, normally I wouldn't, because it's just coloring with these pens. I mean, you get some variation like that. I kind of don't want to try, because I'm not entirely sure what that's going to do. You know what? I'm going to leave it. Leaves are leaves. They're all different. And I think if I went back over, I mean, these markers are like any other marker. If you go back over with the same colors, it's going to darken everything. And then I think I'd be frustrated with that and fighting with it. This is, in case it wasn't painfully obvious, this is self-taught. So none of this is anything that I learned from anywhere. I'm sure there are professional artists out there using Pitt pens and probably using them more correctly than I do. But this is just what I've learned through working with them and through trial and error. So maybe that's another reason why I kind of felt kind of nervous about doing, you know, a color along or a tutorial, whatever you want to call this. I really feel like this is, I don't know, the kind of medium where you just have to just play with it and figure out how it's going to respond to you and to the way you color and the way your hand moves, and you know what I mean? But maybe this will give you just a bit of a leg up and experiment. That's really what it comes down to. Don't be scared. Don't choose your favorite picture in your favorite book to experiment on. But choose a book that, you know, has paper that's going to work with these pens, number one, because if you're trying to experiment in a book that the paper isn't allowing you to move the ink around, that's just going to be frustrating. And how do you know what books or what paper that is? Again, trial and error. Pick a page, you know, the title page or a page near the back, and give these pens a try. Try just a little simple blend. So put down a little bit of dark and then take a lighter color and see if you can get the dark to move using a lighter color. You know, if it doesn't, like here, this is just my scrap scribble paper here, but if I put down, so this is just printer paper, some dark, I don't think I really got that dark to move much. And if I try and use the Tombow, I got it to move a little bit, but not like it's moving on the paper, you know, in the coloring book, right? So, I mean, just try that on a page in the back somewhere and see if you can get the ink to move the way you want it to move. If it's not, that may not be the best book to use these pens. But like I say, and I'm going to be doing a video on this too, you can pre-treat the paper in books like that with some kind of, we're going to try a whole bunch of different mediums to see if we can come up with what's going to work the best for basically putting a coating on paper that doesn't want to allow the inks to move, so that basically almost like a plastic or a resin kind of coating. I mean, that's what a lot of these fixatives are, right? And so if we can put that coating on the paper, that should allow us to let the ink have more open time, right? Not soak into the fibers of the paper right away, so that's going to give us more time to blend. And that's just going to make your blends look a little bit smoother, that's all. So now we got some leaves over here. Do those two. Here we come to our first issue of shadowing. Now, I am not good at shadows and what have you. All I know is if something is underneath something else, then the thing that's on top is probably going to cast a shadow on the thing that's underneath, right? So this flower is over top that leaf. Now, I was putting dark at the bottom of each section of the leaf, and then, you know, medium, and then kind of pulling it out and making it light, which I would still do up here. But down in here, there's probably going to be a little bit of dark on that leaf, kind of right next to where the flower is. I'm not explaining this well. Like I say, I am not... I'm not an art teacher. I'm a chemistry teacher, but not an art teacher. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put some of this dark at the bottom of that leaf section, but I'm also going to put a little bit right next to where that flower is and kind of right around where that other petal thingy is. And then I'm going to use that medium color and again kind of pull the dark out a bit. And I left a tiny little area there. Here, I can even zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. I left that tiny little area, and I'll use my colorless blender to again kind of pull that color in there. But you can see, and I'll try and make the shadow where I put the darker, because I put the dark right around there, right? Just so it's not like a dark line. But so now we've got the lighter area there, but a little bit of a darker line right where the leaf would go underneath the flower. Does that make sense? So again, dark here. And then I'm going to put a little bit of dark just where that leaf would go underneath the flower. Medium. And in this case, there's not a whole lot of area left to do that light. Right? Pull it out, but it's okay. This whole, and again, just touching, just dabbing the tip of this colorless blender, you know, just to kind of make it so that the darker shadow area that I put in right there isn't, you know, just a stark line. That's all I'm doing. Dark, and then kind of just extend the dark up again around that petal. So medium just over here. And then just a little bit of light here at the top. Well, I mean light because I'm basically using Tombow blender to pull this color up and forward. And then just little taps. The very tip of the Tombow blender. Now, if later on I decide that doesn't look shadowed enough, you know, kind of around there, I can always come back with like even a light gray Pitt pen. I don't want to do it when this is still wet though. I do it when it's dry. And put a little line of light gray just to give it more shadow. I mean, I could even, this shadow, particularly right here, got a little bit washed out. Just put a little bit more of that dark in. Just touching my pen and then just tapping it with the colorless blender. Needs a little bit more down there. If I pulled it out too much before in there, just want it a little bit darker so you get that shadow line. So I'm just basically putting in little teeny dots of the darkest green in there, and then taking this colorless blender and just kind of tapping just to dilute and kind of blend that dark out, but still keep it there. Is that a little bit better? I'm going to come back out now, just because now we're back at regular leaf sections. As I'm coloring, I'm thinking in my head, okay, so when I finish these leaves, where am I going to go from there? I mean, I know my color palette. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this on my desk here. I just don't know where they're going to go. My brain can't. I keep forgetting to scribble off my medium there. I can't visualize. I know that two of the browns that we chose, the nougat and the walnut brown, will be used for the wood. So that might be what I do next. Again, if I color things where in my head leaves are green, wood is brown, and so, you know, I'll do those things first and then just see where that takes me. I'll probably do these flowers with the peachy colors, like what do we have? We had cinnamon and beige red. I'll probably do the flowers with those colors. And the bird, I mean, it's a fancy bird with the bow and a crown. The bird, probably going to bring some of those, what was it, cobalt colors in there. They're almost like a tealy kind of blue. Probably bring some of the peachy colors into the bird. Will I bring some green into the bird? I don't know. I'll show you. These leaves I wanted to make very just kind of neutral green. You know, there's no yellow really in this green. It's a very earthy, soft green because, I mean, the main focus of this page is not the leaves, right? It's the bird. So you can still see what I'm doing there. Okay, see, I'm not used to coloring on camera, so I keep forgetting to see if my hand's in the way. I suppose I could speed up some of this footage, but I kind of wanted you guys to see, you know, real time. How fast does this go? You know, how long does this kind of thing take me? One thing you do have to be careful of, and I've done it, because you've got markers in your one hand and you're holding them and they have caps off, and you know you can see me switching all the time. I have dropped them onto the page I'm working, and then sometimes you end up with a marker stain in a place where you did not intend for it to be. It happens. That's when acrylic paint comes in really handy. Acrylic paint covers up a multitude of things. I mean, you notice sometimes I'm pushing the Tombow blender out, sometimes I'm pulling it down. You just gain, you kind of play it by ear. If you want more color, more pigment to move, you know, forward, ooh, see, I almost dropped that, then that's your flicking away from you motion. If you feel like too much pigment is moving forward, you know, do your flicks back instead. I often will do a combination of the two. I'll do some little dots and just, I'm literally touching the Tombow blender to where there's pigment and then touching it in other areas, just to move the pigment around so the leaf gets the shading that I want. It's trial and error. It's getting comfortable with how the pens and the ink move on paper and figuring out how to get the results you want, the look you want. I figure there's no right and wrong in coloring. It's whatever makes you happy. The color will change a bit as it dries. Often your blends can look kind of splotchy when they're wet, and then you let them dry for a bit. They look much better. Like, I think the blend on this leaf, oh, you can't see where I'm pointing at, the blend on this leaf right now, which is dry, probably looks better than the blend I just finished, you know, on that section of that leaf. But it'll look better as it dries. Again, still won't look perfect. You're not going to get that perfect seamless blend like you would with colored pencils. But you just have to kind of embrace that. Can you hear the pen scratching on the paper? Maybe it's a, what do they call that? ASMR? ASMR? At one point I looked up what that stood for, but I forget now. I'm thinking oral something, like AURAL, oral. Come up just a bit more, because it's still kind of struggling with focus there. Sorry guys, it may just be, if I'm going to do color alongs with Pitt pens, because my hand is moving back and forth quickly in front of the camera, whereas maybe that wouldn't happen with colored pencil coloring. Might just be a bit of a focus thing, because I could see it kind of flicking. Well, because as my hand is moving quickly, the camera's trying to focus and then refocus. But that's kind of how I color with Pitt pens. It's that quick hand movement. There was maybe more sophisticated ways to color these leaves, but I thought, well, I'm just going to go with this for this video. There's no point, if you guys are, you know, just starting your Pitt pen, Staedtler pen coloring journey, there's no point in making things more complicated for you than they need to be. Another way you could do it, you can put dark on sort of both ends of each section, and then pull the color kind of in towards the middle, so that instead of, then you would get a highlight kind of, you know, down the middle of the leaf right there, so the leaf would look rounded. I've done that, and it's a cool effect. It's just gonna be that much. Then you have to start thinking about the shape of the leaf, and, you know, where that highlight is gonna run, because it's not gonna run in a straight line because the leaf is curved, and so I just thought this would be easier. Notice the colors are also darker when they first go down. I think that's pretty typical with kind of all markers, whether it's water-based or alcohol. As it dries, it gets a little bit lighter. almost missed that there was a leaf down in here. Okay. There's a tiny bit of, I think that's leaf right in there. Can you see it? I don't know that I'm even going to worry about. I might just put the dark in there because it's so small and tiny that, you know. These, I mean, if you think about where this part of the leaf is, you know, say in comparison up here, this is really, a lot of this is where it's already gotten pretty light. So I might just put a little bit of dark. And then a little bit of the medium. And then pull it out. Just, again, because I want a shadow. That leaf is underneath the flower, so the flower is going to cast a shadow on the leaf, right? So I'm not putting as much dark there as I would have, you know, when I was doing leaves up here, because I'm already at the section of the leaf where it's getting lighter, if that makes sense. Dark hair. And I know there's actually two sections of leaf there, but this one was so tiny I just kind of did them both together. And again, like I was doing over here, if I think that my shadow isn't deep enough or isn't dark enough, I can always take my darkest pen and go back and do a little kind of tap tap like I was doing before. Oh, I was going to say, I think that's all the leaves, but I guess we forgot that part. I forgot that part. We're almost done the leaves. Trying to decide. I was thinking that the stem here should be green too, but now that I look at it, it actually runs directly into the wood of the branch. So maybe I will just do, realize it's probably not realistic, but I might just do the stems all the way out to the middle of the down the centers of the leaves. I might just do those brown because that's they're connected to the wood of the branch, if that makes sense. Once you get a rhythm going, particularly with something like this, it almost becomes kind of zen. Just switching out those markers. There we go. So there are all our leaves colored. So I'm going to put these greens away for now. So before I put caps back on things, I like to give them all a good scribble off on my scribble paper off to the side there. So I scribbled off my colorless blender, and I'll just scribble off the medium green and then put the cap on. And I'll even scribble off the dark just in case. Just because so often I have not done that, and then went to grab them for doing something else, and there was still ink left on because I'd forgotten. So, what should we do now? Why don't we do the flowers, and then we'll worry about the wood. Yeah, we'll do that. So for the flowers, I'm going to take my two peachy colors here. So that was Cinnamon 189 and Beige Red 132. Again, this might be called medium flesh, medium skin, medium flesh. I don't know, something like that. But yeah, Beige Red is the newer name. Again, uncap both of them. Have them in my left hand. How am I going to use this? Yeah, I think I will. Why not? So the cinnamon is the darkest one. And I'm going to basically do the same kind of, and I know it's really simple, but the same kind of blending. So I'm going to have dark at the base of the petal, and then kind of the medium as we go out, and then take the colorless blender and just pull it out so it's quite light around the edges. Am I going to worry about... I think I'm going to go right over top that circly thing there, because I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in with maybe like a super golden marker or a gold gel pen or something like that and color that in. So if I do that, that's going to be opaque. It's not going to matter that I, colored over top of that. I could try and go around it if I wanted. I don't think I'm going to worry about putting a shadow around that because I'm not visualizing in my head. I'm not thinking, this is raised, that little circle is raised up off the petal. I'm thinking it's part of the petal, but I could just be wrong. So again, there's little... Now, this is a slightly larger area. So you can see I'm putting my flicks in. Can you see how it's not... I'm trying to make them so that they are different lengths, right? So it's not a straight line. And then this is the 132, the Beige Red. So I put that pen down kind of in the darker ink, not right down to the bottom, but and then just try and pull it out a bit. And again, my flicks there are not, try and not make them a straight line. And then I'm just using the Tombow blender, colorless blender, to again try and pull some of that ink out and basically make a really light version of that Beige Red, that medium ink. So I can go to the edge of the petals. Okay? Again, it's not a perfect blend, but I'm okay with that. It'll dry a little bit less patchy than that. Sorry, I'm always turning my book so that I can flick away from me. I just find that easier. So I'm going to come back out a bit just because, and hopefully the camera won't struggle with focus. I do think these circles, and I don't know why I think that, are above. So I'm going to try and put, they're kind of at the base here anyway of the petals. So I'm going to make sure that there's dark, or whatever my darkest color is, all around them. And then worry about my flicks. And the flicks are not going to be the same each time. But nature isn't perfectly symmetrical. I'm just trying to think if there's anything in nature that would be perfectly symmetrical. Usually not. Usually the environment has something to say, so even if something starts out perfectly symmetrical, a bug comes along and takes a chomp out of one side, or you know, one side gets more sun than the other, or one area, I don't know, one area ends up having more wind on it, so it gets pushed sideways, or it gets bird poop on it, so now it's not the same color anymore. It's very rarely nature is perfect, so I don't worry about it. Again, if you're looking for a tutorial on how to color, you know, beautifully and perfectly and realistically, this is not your channel. Not your channel. What do you think? Liking the peachy flowers? I realize they're probably supposed to be probably cherry blossoms, maybe something like that. So I could have made them more pink instead of peach. And I'm actually getting little, if you overwork this paper, little bits of it are going to come up. I mean, it's still paper. It's gray paper, but it's still paper. And I'm kind of going back over and over. So if little bits of the paper start to come up, just, they'll kind of stick to the end of your colorless blender. Just scribble it off on the paper over to the side. You know, get the little bits of paper off your blender tip and keep going. Paper with any kind of water medium is I mean, unless it's watercolor paper, so it's got a lot of, you know, professional grade sizing on there, it's going to start to break down. You'll notice if I want it darker, the base here, I keep going back over it. Notice that? I mean, any marker, right? If you want a darker version of the color, just keep going back over it. Notice when I get right up to the edge of the petal, it's pretty hard to control, you know, flicking and to stop right at the edge of the petal. So I'll flick till I get close to the edge of the petal, and then I'll flick almost back down, just so I can get so I'm not flicking right out wildly past the edge of the line work. And I'm just barely touching these markers and this colorless blender to the paper. You know, it doesn't take a lot to move that ink around. So there, what do you think about that flower? Now, there are like underneath petals here. So these were the bigger petals. I think for these underneath petals, I won't bother with the colorless blender. I'm just going to put, I'm going to kind of keep going back over it. So there's a lot of that dark cinnamon. And then I'm just going to take the beige red and go right out to the edge of that underneath petal. We'll see if that's enough. I know the lighting isn't great. I'm doing this at night. We'll see if that's dark enough. Because I don't think it is. So, you know what? Remember I said before I'd wait till it dries? You could. Or you could just go back in. This paper is, like I say, it's pretty good paper, but you are gonna come to a point where it's gonna, and it's starting to pale on me. So I'm gonna leave that for now. But yeah, I want those little petals. If I come in, you can see, hopefully. I know the lighting isn't great, but I want this darker than this. So hopefully I'm achieving that. If not, like I can always come back in with a gray, you know, and kind of over, what do they call it, overpaint? Glaze over? I don't know the terms. You know, that darker petal at the bottom there to give it more of a shadow, because it is under, I'm assuming it's underneath the main big flower petals. Again, I'm sort of almost doing this twice just because that's giving me a darker underneath petal color. And again, it's that flicking forward. Flick, 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 flick. Try and make your flicks so that you don't have a straight line at the top edge of the flicks. I mean, you often, it would be pretty hard to, for me anyway, if I'm flicking like this, to make it be, you know, a perfectly straight line at the top edge of your flicks, because flicks by nature kind of end up random lengths, at least mine do. Guess I could, right now anyway, put the cap back on the Tombow blender. I'm not using it for these little ones. Try to keep my hand back a little bit further on the, I don't always remember, because normally when I'm coloring I'm kind of like this, but then you can't see what I'm doing. So I'm trying to keep my hand back further on the pen, but if I forget, my apologies. Alright, there's that flower. Since I have these two in my hand, I might as well do the underneath ones of the next flower while I'm at it. Then I can bring the colorless blender back out and we can do the big petals on these flowers. Or on this flower, I should say. I'm trying to think what I'm going to do with the centers. We'll probably make them yellow, because in my head, centers of flowers are yellow. Not that they would have to be, but just how things go in my head. You know what we could do? Yeah, maybe we'll do that. Maybe we will make them the same antique gold kind of look that I plan on doing for the bird's crown. Because otherwise, that light, the only yellow I really pulled, well, I pulled that ivory, and the only other yellow that I really had was that light yellow glaze. But if I just use that, that's going to be too bright. It's going to be too neon looking. And the only reason I know that is, again, trial and error with these pens and with the different various colors. You know, in past, when I've just used, you know, the light yellow glaze, it's a very bright yellow. I can use it over top the combination that I use to give the kind of antique gold look, and it'll brighten up the antique gold look a bit, but on its own I think it's too bright. Goodness, we're an hour and 26. Okay, so I'm going to uncap my Tombow blender again, and then we'll start doing these petals. So again, the darker one is the cinnamon. Putting a fair amount of it around the base of the petal here, you know, even going back over. And then getting my little flicks. Using a 132 beige red, flicking out. Is it the same amount I flicked out in previous petals? I have no idea. Oh, you may also notice I actually took out the protective sheet that I had underneath there when I went and got the bulldog clips, because there's no way that this should be going through to the other side of the page, not on this paper. And even if it did, I can't see it bleeding through to the page even, you know, opposite that one. I'll be really mad if it does, but I don't think it will. And the paper that I had underneath was bigger than the book, so the bulldog clips didn't fit. Now, if I was just coloring this not as a color along, I wouldn't probably bother with those bulldog clips. But, oh, we have a little bit of a shadowing issue here, don't we? Because this edge of this petal is tucked underneath that other one, so I'm going to put a little bit of the cinnamon, which is the dark one, well, in this combination, just along that edge. Then use my Tombow blender to flick out like I was before, and just try and just work the edge of where I put that cinnamon, so it's not quite such a stark line, but it's still a bit of a dark line there, or a dark area. So, you know, that should tell my brain or whoever's looking at this, it's lighter here on this petal, and it's darker here, so this petal is over top of that petal, which is, that's how it's drawn, right? So and really, you know, in a little area like this, I can't really flick down in there, right? Because there's no room, and I don't need to. I'm just almost touching the pen to the paper. There's so much pigment in these Pitt pens or in the Staedtler pens that you kind of don't need to, you know, color. Lots of times it's enough to just barely touch the pen to the paper, honestly. A nice part about working with really, I know it's tough because these are not cheap supplies, and they're not in everybody's budget. You could try doing this with just plain water-based markers. It's not, I don't think, going to work as well, particularly this kind of blending on the paper technique, There's something about the ink formulation. I think one of my viewers was saying that it's almost better in the Staedtler markers, the Staedtler Pigment Brush Pens, than Pitt Pens. And you know what? I can kind of see that. But there's something in the formulation of these inks. They just seem to sit on the page a little longer than, you know, if I had gotten a whole bunch of Tombows to try and do this. Well, I mean, these are all water-based pens. The Pitt Pens and the Staedtler pens are pigment ink. Tombow and Lyra and all those, you know, Crayola Super Tips, those are all dye-based inks. I don't think it's a pigment versus a dye thing that makes the ink from these sit on the page a little longer. I think maybe because, you know, you've got pigments versus dyes, maybe they had to make the recipe, the formulation for the solvent in these pens a little different. Maybe there's a little bit more glycerin, a little bit more shellac, probably shellac, in these pens than in other water-based pens. And that's what's helping the ink to have more of that open time, where it's still wet on the page and you can move it. But I mean, you can certainly try this with, you know, other water-based pens. Like I say, don't pick your favorite page. Just pick a book and a page that you're okay if it doesn't turn out the way you wanted it to, and experiment. That's the best way I can think of to learn how to use a medium. I mean, you can certainly watch someone do tutorials, and that can be good to start, but there comes a time when I think you just have to be brave and just start experimenting on your own. I think that's the number one best way to learn how to do something. You know, get the basic instructions. You're not starting from nothing, but then just start to play. I think you'll learn far more just playing and experimenting than you will watching, you know, tutorial after tutorial after tutorial. But that's just me. So there you go. There is some leaves and flowers. So again, I'm going to scribble off everything off to the side, put caps on. Just the next time I grab these colors, I want to make sure that the actual color is at the tip of the marker, not a different color. Scribble things off, cap them up. All right. So like I say, I think these circles out here, I'll probably come back with like a gold gel pen or a super golden marker. Probably these other spots here too. But the center of the flower, where there's like that cross hatching, that's where I'm going to do, hopefully, a little bit of antique gold kind of effect. So I'm going to come back in, so we may have some of that same focus issue, but you just have to grit and bear it, I guess. So to do this, I have, dark sepia, 175, raw umber, 180, and ivory, 103. So I'm going to take the caps off of all of these, put them in my left hand. Obviously the dark sepia is the darkest. There's the raw umber is kind of my mid-tone, and then this is I'm going to use it as a blender, but it's not obviously a colorless blender. It's got some yellow tone to it. So I'm going to take the dark sepia and put just a tiny, tiny bit of it. So basically I want the darkest around the edge of this circle, and I'm going to come in and have the lightest in the center. So this appears domed. I don't know if I'm going to get that right or not, but that's what we're going to try. So very, very little of this. So I'm almost just kind of, can you see, I'm almost just touching the pen to the page, and I am going to go all the way around here. I think with this paper, it's going to be forgiving enough to give us a little bit of open time there. Won't dry. And then I'm going to take this raw umber and just flick. I'm going to start, you know, overlapping that dark sepia and flick towards the center. Not a whole lot. You can see just a little. Still leaving a fair amount of white in the center. And then I'm going to take the ivory and pull that in to the center. You see? Now, if I think the ivory has picked up too much of the darker color, I'll actually go and scribble it off and then come back and... because I don't want to pull the brown into the very center. I want the center to still be light, and if I think there's too much of a dark line around the outside, I'll just kind of go back and maybe pull a little bit more into the center. I say you can move this ink on this paper quite well for quite a while. So I'm going to let that dry because it's not looking too great right now. Let's come back out. But it hopefully, maybe, it's actually not looking as good as I'd hoped. Too much dark around the edges, I think. So I'm going right out to the edges now with this ivory and pulling that dark sepia out a bit because I think it's giving me too much of a line around the edge. All right, we'll see. So very sparingly, this dark sepia, you need very little of it to do this effect because it's so dark. So I'm almost just touching the tip of the pen around the outside, kind of going around those circles. And then I take the raw umber 180 and pull that dark sepia forward. Again, if you feel like there's too much dark sepia getting on your raw umber, just quickly go and scribble it off a bit, you know, when you're halfway around. And then I'm going to take the ivory, pull everything towards the center. Usually I have to scribble off that ivory quite a bit because, again, I don't want to pull all that brown into the center, but I still do want to pull the brown. And the paper is starting to pill. You know, I can, because I'm really working it. So just a light touch on your Pitt pen. You know, don't be scrubbing at that paper. There. That one got kind of dark. We'll see how that turns out. Because I have these three in my hand, and I know that's what I want to do for the crown here, I might as well go ahead and do it. Now this is going to get tricky because we've got some small spaces here. And this antique gold look can be tricky when you have a small space to work with. So I'm going to forego the dark sepia. I'm just going to use this raw umber. And for this little thingy here on top, I'm just going to take the raw umber around the edge. Again, just kind of just touching it on. And then I'm going to take the ivory and pull that in towards the middle. Scribble it off because it's got too much brown on it. Because I think in a small area like that, the dark sepia does give, and I probably should have done this when I was doing the flower centers too. Again, just because I want the middle of these little thingies to be lighter. I think in these small areas, the dark sepia is just, it's too dark and it's got too much pigment. Like that. You put a little bit more of the raw umber at the base of where these little dealies are in the crown. Yeah, I like that a little bit better. So maybe a little bit of more of the raw umber at the base there. A little bit more at the base of this one. And then just kind of pulling it out with the ivory. Just really carefully. Yeah. Alright, and that gives kind of a gold effect. Really, just those two colors. So ivory and raw umber. Again, that dark sepia is good if you want a really dark edge, but you have to be careful with it. You know what? I need a drink, so I'm just going to take a quick break. I'll be right back. Alright, back. I actually put the lid back on the dark sepia because I think for these crown sections, I'm just going to be using the raw umber and the ivory for now. Because I think I like that look a little bit better. I think if I do want to put more shadows in, I can always come back after. Do you know what I mean? So I'm going to kind of do, you know though, I almost feel like these sections are different than the in-between stuff. Like the in-between stuff maybe is fabric and these are the gold. We could do it that way. So let's think about, okay, so, and I know I'm supposed to have a light source that comes from a certain direction. Let's say top right-ish. I don't know. But say this middle one right here, I would think it's going to be rounded. You know what I mean? Like that. So again, like up here, you want the lightest part down the middle. I could be totally wrong on that. But I'm going to put raw umber, kind of, and then maybe like that. And I know, isn't that called Ring of Pearls? You're not supposed to do that. Basically, you're not supposed to make everything so that it's darker on the edges and light in the middle. But I think for right here, that's what I'm going for. So and then just kind of tap and touch the ivory and until you get a blend you like. So for this, I'm going to do the same. For this one, though, I feel like your lighter part's going to be right along that top edge, right? I don't know. Let's just go with that. So instead of doing the raw umber all the way around, I'm going to do the raw umber just at the bottom, like that, and then kind of pull it up. that. Again, I keep scribbling off. You can probably hear me. You can see my hand going off camera, scribbling off that ivory. Just, you know, if I feel like it's got too much brown on it and I'm pulling too much brown forward, just scribble it off. So, that makes sense? So, okay, this one, a little bit of raw umber, kind of all the way around. The edges. That. And then this one, I feel like the light is hitting the top edge. There. I think that's kind of a gold look, isn't it? I might, again, do these little circles with like a gold gel pen. But I will do these, whatever they are, the same as kind of we did up here. So these are tricky because they're very small. So very lightly, barely touching the page with that raw umber. And then just little small motions with the ivory. This one's a little easier because it's a little bigger. Raw umber. Make sure we got enough at the bottom. That little, it's like a little golden petal, I guess. Just because we want to make sure that we've got more, like we did up here, some more shadow at the bottom. And if I feel like there's not enough, I'll do the same thing I did up top there. Just go back in with the raw umber and put a little bit more shadow at the bottom of each of these. Ooh, that one's really tiny. Sometimes they don't blend as well as other times. Now my question is, what color is the fabric? Because maybe I'm thinking, I don't know. Wouldn't this in here be like, I'm trying to think of the like the crown jewels in the UK. I think it's like fabric between the, well, I could be wrong on that. As a Canadian, I should know that. We are a constitutional monarchy. The sovereign of the UK is technically our official head of state. I'm pretty sure there's fabric in there. I'm thinking for royalty it's normally purple too, isn't it? But that was not one of the colors we chose to use on here, so. Could make it teal blue. Could make it this peachy color, but I feel like that's not going to be enough contrast with the gold. Teal blue would be nice though, maybe. That's the only other color. I think all green. Could make it green, because there's green at the bottom of the page, the leaves. And then this would be green kind of at the top. See, this, you're hearing me, what do they call this, stream of consciousness? I never have a plan. Because I can't visualize. And so, now I know there's all kinds of ways that I could do that. You know, I could photocopy this page, and before I ever start, I could try out some color palettes. I know a lot of people will take a scan of a page and then put it into something like Procreate and figure out their color schemes there before they try it on paper. I don't actually have an iPad, so that wouldn't really work. But I could certainly photocopy this page, and even though it wouldn't be the same quality paper, it would at least, you know, I could get an idea. But I don't know, there's a part of me that just likes to wing it, I guess. I'm going to do the bottom part of this crown too, this gold kind of effect. So I'm turning this sideways because I feel like, again, if this crown is curved this way, this middle part here is going to be the lightest part, right? So I want to flick. Now I am going to have to flick down from the top, which is harder for me. It's easier for me to flick away from myself. And I am going to bring my dark sepia back. I'm going to have to be very careful with it though, because it's not going to require a lot of it. So just the very edges there. Just teeny little flicks. And then I take my raw umber. I'm actually going to scribble that off right away. And just flicks. Do the same thing on the other side. Ivory. Just keep kind of working towards that center and keeping in your mind you want that center there, the lightest. Kind of like that. If I think there's too stark a line somewhere, I'll just go back over and try and pull it out a bit, blend it out a bit. So now we're going to do I may just do this. Will that work? No. So we're going to do the same thing on this little top piece of. I'm trying to think what to do with that middle stuff there, but I was going to do this and just ignore all the line work, but I don't think that's going to work. Basically try and bring those together in the middle. There. What? And you know what? I got actually a little bit of the ivory right in there, but I'm not going to worry about it because I do think this is either going to be green or blue. So it's going to be darker than the ivory, so it's not going to matter. What to do in there? I'm going to put the cap back on my dark sepia because I think those spaces are too little and this would just be too much, overwhelming. So I'm just going back to my raw umber and my ivory. And I think I'm going to try. These are very tiny spaces. Well, okay, I'm going to start the ones in the middle, and I'm going to do kind of that same thing I did up with these, up top with the little round things. It's like a little outline of raw umber, and then kind of pull to the center with your ivory. Try and leave some of that. I'm just almost tapping the page with the ivory. Try and leave some of that raw umber around the edge, and you're just pulling it, because really the combination of the ivory and the raw umber is what gives that golden color, I find. But you don't want to pull all that brown into the center. Now the tricky part is I'm gonna have to adjust this little recipe I have going here as I get to the edges, because if this part is curved, so is that part. So I can't do all of these the same. They're gonna have to get darker as I get out closer to the sides of the crown, right? This suddenly got much more complicated than I intended it to. This is how I color, though. I'm like, well, this is how things are going. Yeah, see, at this point, if I'm sort of matching, this is where the light was, right? And now I'm starting to get darker. So maybe what I'll do is I'll put a little bit more of the raw umber. And when I go to pull out with the ivory, hopefully these squares will be a little bit darker, because there won't be so much light in the middle. That's my hope. And then as I get out here, I'm actually going to pull this dark sepia back out. I'm going to put on just this edge of that little square some dark sepia, and then kind of pull it out with the umber a bit. Oh, and then again, just kind of tap to the center. Get dark enough. Hoping they're getting darker. And then this one, yeah, that edge of dark sepia there. Basically almost no ivory in that edge one. Excuse me. Did that work? Maybe. Oops. And less ivory. Hopefully on these ones. More raw umber. And then the last two, that edge, put a tiny little bit of the dark sepia. I admit, when you get areas this small, pencils would be much, much easier. You can sharpen them up nicely and get in there. But, I don't know, and then the very edge there. It's kind of a challenge to do, you know, spaces that teeny with, particularly once you use your Pitt pens and Staedtler pens for a while, the tips do tend to get a little bit frayed. So it can be challenging to get into small spaces like that. I think we will do the beak gold. I realize birds' beaks aren't gold, but this bird's beak can be. So thinking this top part is maybe overlapping the bottom a bit. So this is the dark sepia. Just a tiny line of it underneath. See what I did there? Raw umber. Kind of pulling that dark sepia out, just a hint. And then ivory. I want the bottom of the beak kind of dark, because to me the bottom of the beak is on the bottom, and if the light source is coming from the top or even from the top right, the bottom of the beak is going to be darker. Okay, top of the beak. So instead of, you know, it's going to be kind of like what we did over here. Rather than having the highlight in the center, I would think the highlight would be along the top of the beak. Does that make sense? But I don't want to put this dark sepia right here, because I put it underneath to indicate that the bottom of the beak was more in shade. So maybe just a little bit of dark sepia here. Just a little bit. And then my raw umber. Pull that out. Make sure we're not carrying any of that dark sepia forward, but this is mostly just raw umber along the bottom of the top part of the beak, if that makes sense. Just little flicks like that. And then my ivory. Again, keep cleaning it off if I think it's got too much brown on it. There. Now our bird has a golden beak. And I think his little feet are going to be gold. And then I think we'll call it quits for this one. For this, not this picture, for the color along. It's already 2 hours. So yeah, we'll come back. We'll come back again. Part 2. Maybe there'll be a part 3. I don't know. And we'll worry about the branch and the bird. So this is my dark sepia. So it's going to be darker in between his toes. This is where I start to get, I'm just going to put a little teeny bit of dark sepia right there. This is where I start to get confused over lighting. And I basically am just going to try and do the best I can. So I actually put that raw umber down almost over top the line work between his toes. And then I'm just using the ivory to pull it out a bit. So again, a little bit of dark sepia right where this is kind of tucked underneath his body. And then pull that out a tiny bit with the raw umber. The raw umber kind of along the line work between his toes. And the ivory kind of in the middle. Tiny areas like this. Oh, you know what? There's a bit of a line work mistake there. Let me see if I can show you. Can you see that? His toes need to go back up to his body. So I'm going to take, this is a uni pin fine liner. It's water fade proof pigment ink. And I'm going to, I hate doing this because I always think I'm going to screw it up. So, I mean, his toe needs to, the pen's not working. Right? There. It just needed to connect to his body. So I'm going to let that dry. Otherwise I'm going to be smearing that black everywhere. And I'm going to do his little leg down here. So a little bit of dark sepia right up underneath body. And then I'm going to take the raw umber, pull that out a little bit, clean it off. Basically, I'm thinking that the little back part of his leg there is going to be the lightest right here, because you know it's shadowed up here because it's under his body. It's a little bit shadowed down here because it's behind the flower. Just kind of do it like that. Now this, lightest is going to be along the top of his leg there, maybe there. Do I need the dark sepia for anything? Maybe just there. Shadowed a bit. Maybe a little bit down here where it kind of tucks in behind the branch. Using the raw umber, pull that out a little bit, and then I'm going to have raw umber along the bottom there, like that, right? Before that dries, I'm going to do the ivory up here. So sometimes on a bigger area like this, you notice I just stop down here. You know, kind of pick, I don't know, natural stopping point. And now I'm going to go in and do the rest of this bird foot. Again, just some raw umber kind of between his toes. Maybe I'll even put some raw umber because his toe kind of almost goes behind that leaf. Now I'm just getting crazy. There. A little bit there. And ivory to the rescue. Come on, ivory, make it look good. Paper, like I say, is a bit more forgiving. This will stay, the ink will stay a little bit wetter on here, a little longer, so that I can, you know, do something like that. Put a bunch of the darker ink down and I can still get it to move a little bit. Oh, better not forget to come back and do his little toe we fixed up here. Alright. Now one last thing that I will show you before we call it a stop for right now. So I'm scribbling off all my colors before I put the lids back on. Sometimes when I use this tricolor combination right here for the antique golds, once they dry, look at all my scribbling, it can get a little dull looking. And so sometimes if I want to brighten it up a bit, so to make the gold look more gold, that's where this light yellow glaze can come in. So particularly in the middles of these flowers, I think that just got too dark. So I'm going to come in and we can see if this is going to make any kind of difference. So this is dry now. I'm just going to take this, I know it looks almost green, but it's not. Light yellow glaze, and just go over the whole, just lightly, you can see, almost with the side of the pen. Scroll it off a bit, because it actually will still pick up a little bit of that darker pigment. I don't know. I can see a difference between that and that. That looks yellower. This looks, well, more ivory. But I think for the centers of flowers, I think that little bit of, it just makes it a bit brighter. Again, if your paper's starting to complain, just almost, it's almost like you're tapping the marker on there, holding it way far back, not scrubbing it. I'm cleaning it off every now and again because I'm actually getting little paper fibers that are coming up. So I'm going to be extra careful here. And then we'll let that dry. And we'll see if that gives us a little bit brighter centers to the flowers. Hopefully when I continue this next time I can, well, we'll see. I'm having some work done in the house, and so it's hard for me to do this kind of thing, film videos during the day, because it's very loud. So I'm doing it at night when my lighting isn't the greatest. But just as a check here, I'm going to take these clips off. Let's see if any of this went through. And it did not. I mean, even sort of right there is where I was working the yellow in over top. This paper's phenomenal. Phenomenal. All right, so this is part one of the, I don't know what you want to call it, color along in Emily Vladahall Oberg's Fairy Tales and Folklore using our Pitt pens. And yeah, I'll be back for, like I say, part two. Could even be part three. We'll have to see. And we will figure out what to do with the bird, the branch, and then we'll also do a background on this. So I hope everyone is safe. I hope everyone is well. And I hope everyone is enjoying their coloring. Till next time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.